Listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Get ready to go against the grain. We have another great show for you today. We're going to start off with a white-hot rage I've experienced over the last couple of days. Our situation in this country has gotten disturbingly precarious, more extraordinary than I think many people realize. The President of the United States has practically declared martial law, war on the citizenry of this country, holding a Bible upside down, standing in front of a church. Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, in opposition to this, are utterly and entirely worse than irrelevant. A little later, we'll discuss a positive new development at the George Floyd case, in addition to our continued coverage of the protests sweeping across the world. Despite, and dare I say, because of the onerously early curfew combined with Donald Trump's unhinged speech in the Rose Garden last night, numbers in the nation's capital and across the United States expanded. We had thousands in the nation's capital. Apparently, there are thousands in London right now. You had fires in France with what seems to be tens or hundreds of thousands marching in France. And yes, the protests have expanded to 50 states in the United States. The public did not sit quietly with Donald Trump basically throwing down the gauntlet like that. And they responded. God bless him. I've opined a day or so ago about the public perspective of the protests, meaning what is the public thinking of this? How does the public perceive it? I know the Yellow Vest movement had about a 70% approval rating from the standpoint of the public as they went from month to month to month, which is not necessarily the easiest thing to sustain. Now, the numbers of people around the world that have marched, France, Amsterdam, New Zealand, UK, Germany, I've never seen anything like this. The question becomes, why? Why are so many people around the world galvanized by this very specific case of Floyd George? And how do they, perceive us, but also how do we in this country perceive the events that are taking place on the ground here in all of these various states? In the second hour, we're going to hop across the pond and discuss policing in Europe and the reason why millions came out to march and the reasons why those people identified with George Floyd's ordeal. Not to mention, from a wider perspective, the disparity in the dispensation of justice from the standpoint of the UK to the United States. We also have an update on Assange. He is not in good health, and that's to put it mildly. He's been missing some of his cases, his court appearances. Last but not least, it is Revelations. Now, Revelations is one of my favorite segments. It's on Hump Day, and that gives me the perfect opportunity to basically nerd out, to go have my nerd running through a field of lilies in the sunshine, unabashed, naked, and unashamed. But every so often, I get the opportunity to do political revelations. And today, we will get to do a political revelation that is utterly and entirely hilarious. You are going to love it. But going from that strange image of running through a field of lilies, naked and unafraid, I'm going to go to somewhat of another strange image, maybe even stranger. A black man is murdered by a cop. Now, this takes place for years, for decades, hundreds of years. But this one, for whatever reason, was so ghastly and so horrific that it galvanized a population. And in galvanizing that population, protests, righteous indignation rose up and set a police station on fire, not to mention going through the neighborhood, most of which were peaceful. But of course, media always focuses on the riots because those are the things that sell. If something is burning, eyes are going to be attached to it. Now, the reality of this is that in ramming his knee into George Floyd's throat, he basically did something that many cops have done. Meaning he did it so casually, he probably didn't think what he was doing was wrong at all. Meaning this has become so routine and so casual that this is basically these guys run by unaccountable, despite the things that they're doing to the civilian population, the people they're supposed to protect and serve. Between the years of 2013 to 2019, 99% of the cops that have been charged or that have shot someone or killed someone, have not been charged with a crime. 99% of the cops from 2013 to 2019 have not resulted in charges for a crime. To put that in perspective, there were over 1,000 cop killings last year where cops killed or murdered people, a disproportionate share of which are African American. Now, 24%, if I'm not mistaken, with African Americans making only 13% of the population. This doesn't even touch the levels of harassment, or for that matter, the issues that take place just on a daily basis of abuse. Murder is the least of the issues. I hope you understand what I mean. While murder is the worst, this maximum justice, there's also this other element of harassment, the things that they do where you don't necessarily get to the point of actually killing somebody, but you making someone's life miserable. Those things are also aspects of the job. Take Derek Chauvin, for example, the man who killed Floyd. Chauvin had 18 complaints over the course of his career, only 2 of them resulting in discipline. And he was also implicated in a killing before that they let him off in addition to additional shootings after that killing. They continue to let these guys off without any level of accountability in real terms. And to put this that much worse, the deadliest jobs of America, cops don't even rate in the top 10. Above policemen are mechanics and repair managers, groundskeepers, maintenance workers, landscapers, bartenders, taxi drivers, agriculture workers, electrical workers, construction workers. Yes, there are a lot of other jobs out there that are more dangerous than cops. And yet we train these guys with this fear-based way of training where they're going to make sure that they're going to pull a bullet in you if it means that they're going to get home. They take no chances, which means that your life is always potentially under forfeit when they dispense the maximum amount of justice, infinite justice, to put you down for some issue, whether real or not, with this complete knowledge that 99% of the time they will walk and will not even be charged. Now, Trump, in his primal scream on the White House lawn, has basically released the hounds of war in this case, but this time on the American public itself. Now, the public, who was righteously indignant and who was angry about the protests, came out multicultural, multiracial, all of them indignant over what happened. And the catch here is, I think, because of how many people have been coming out with the various groups, that many of these groups may not entirely identify from the standpoint of race, but they can definitely identify with the standpoint of class, especially with the education that has taken place over the last 8 years with Sanders running in the office for the race. I'm making a point that this specific case is just different somehow. And I can't entirely put my finger on why, but it has galvanized the nation and galvanized the world. And this is at a time where you have 40 million people that are out of a job, 40-something million people without health care. You're going to have rents or people being evicted en masse going into July. You have a lot of chaos going on. 100,000 people that died from COVID-19. 1.8 or 1.9 million infected. That number is only going to go up. 43% of those jobs are supposedly not coming back. I'm trying to give you this notion of the chaos that is going on in your country right now. And on top of that, you've now added discontent with the public. And a president who should be trying to quell this, who should be trying to ameliorate some of the rough edges of this, has basically functioned in the interest of the top 1% while putting all sorts of stress on the public by leaving it to basically fend for itself in the middle of a pandemic. All of this military, all of these police that he was able to whip up in a moment, he couldn't do nothing in order to get people the supplies they needed for protective gear or for vaccines or equipment. But the military, the police force, yeah, you can find a ton of those guys to go out there and do that particular job of basically beating and bashing protesters. If you remember, in Charlottesville, there were a couple of good Nazis. And then you had the other case where they basically rammed into Michigan, guns blazing over their guns. Trump had nothing to say. But this, he's uniquely bothered. The reason is because he knows that these things are typically black issues. And he's not going to get the black vote. And from the standpoint of people who are mainly Democrats, well, they may care about this. The African American community may care about this. But does his base care? And that answer will probably no. Basically, they would care more about the law and order angle of this. They would care for order. Even if they protest, they would care for order, as opposed to something like justice. meaning they would rather these protests quell and we just go back to some same old, and things like this continue to happen. Who is there for the Democratic Party then? Who's the opposition to this? You have basically fascists running through the streets, hitting and beating the American citizenry, hitting them with tear gas, pepper spraying, attacking with flashbang grenades. You have basically an assault on the American public, riding through in tanks in neighborhoods. This is what they're doing to the public. So what is the Democratic Party doing in opposition to this? Nothing. Nothing. Nancy Pelosi walks out holding a Bible, basically saying Donald Trump, he needs to open this Bible every so often. You're in the law. You're in legislature. Your job is not to give me some kind of religious doctrine. What are you having from the standpoint of policy? What about marching out there, forcing those police to hit you, if you indeed believe and back up these particular causes? Which I don't believe. Joe Biden has gotten to the point of saying, just shoot him in the leg. Maybe we can train cops to shoot people in the leg while he's in a church lying to black people about civil rights. This is the opposition, meaning there is no opposition. These protesters are on their own. Basically, the only rights you have are the ones that you can basically defend. And at this point, you have no defense in the political space. Our answer, our solution is in the streets. Bob, this is where we are, right? I mean, I find this to be extremely severe. The president of the United States has basically declared martial law and said he's going to put military on the soil. He has had police bashing on national television. Like, this is not even hidden, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say he's declared it, right? I mean, he's threatened it, because declaring means like we're doing it and it's happening. I don't believe we're doing it.
There are police, National Guard, lined up in Washington, D.C. right now.
Yeah, but that's not like the Air Force or the Army is not here. I mean, martial law. Yeah, I guess we're parsing things. That's not the point of what you're saying.
Yeah. I know what you mean. It's practical. He's saying he's going to bring the military, but he hasn't done it yet. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So, but yeah, no, it's not like, hey, Jamal, just hang out for a few weeks. Give the guy a chance to calm down a little bit. No, that's not the point we're getting at right now. No, I hear you on a range of things. The National Guard, and it's terrifying to actually be around downtown. I mean, I was out until about 1 a.m. last night, riding around, interviewing, talking to different people that are out downtown. And yeah, I mean, it's just block after block after block of National Guardsmen. And they're just sitting there. I mean, there was like 20 people, 20 National Guard on this block, 20 on the next block. And it's weird, too, what buildings they protect. And there's a lot of federal buildings mixed with local D.C. buildings. And so all of a sudden you go like 4 buildings, and then you'll turn the corner and you get to one of the federal buildings, and there's like 50 National Guard people. So it is just incredibly eerie. It's incredibly spooky. Helicopters continue to fly this morning here in the nation's capital. I wanted to touch on a few different points that I think are helping escalate the protests to where they are right now. Obviously, the one is the interplay with the coronavirus right now and the economy and the stay-at-home orders. You have a lot of people that have been staying at home for months on end now, to one degree or another, in social distancing. And humans just have a natural desire to come together. And right now, in this moment, as economy seeing nearly 30% unemployment, people are outraged, people are angry, people are seeing the failure of government, Democrats, Republicans, across the board, and responding to what's taking place in this moment. So I think people are rather irritated and moved by that. I also think there is been a break in the Black Lives Matter protest movement for several years now. I mean, the resistance movement, the Women's March, the anti-Trump stuff has really kind of consumed a lot of our political spaces. And obviously, despite there being some 1,000 police killings a year, there hasn't been one as graphic and caught on camera like George Floyd. And so I think that also allowed there to be a new spark in this moment. And the third thing, I think people are just feeling incredibly disenfranchised, especially a lot of young people. And we talked about that quite a bit on the show, about Bernie Sanders winning the young vote overwhelmingly and having what felt like to many people either had the primary process stolen from him or rigged against him. And obviously, set Bernie Sanders' flaws aside, I think a lot of people are feeling disenfranchised. They have no leader that they look to in the national political sphere. It's not Donald Trump. It's not Joe Biden. Where else are they going to turn but to the streets? And so I think there's a lot of different combinations that are leading to this incredibly unique moment, to say the least. Jamal, with that, we do need to take our first break of the hour. In the first hour, we'll be talking with our colleague Nicole Roussel, who was shot in the leg by a rubber bullet near the White House while covering the ongoing protest in the United States for a photo op by Donald Trump. We'll also hear from people who queued in line for over 4 hours yesterday to vote in Washington, D.C.'s primary. And we'll talk more about Donald Trump's approval ratings dropping below 40%. If that's not enough for you, don't worry, Misfits. We have a second hour for you after that. We're here until 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So give us a call, 202-521-4669. 521-1320. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in DC. We're back after this.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. Tune in to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for the latest news, commentary, and political analysis. What's really behind the political and social crisis gripping the United States and the world? Forget the spoon-fed soundbites from the pundits who know so little about so much. We bring you independent experts, analysts, and activists. Learn what really makes the decision makers take from the boardrooms of Wall Street to the West Wing of the White House. Here is where the people fighting for change speak and are heard loud and clear, 5 days a week on Radio Sputnik and SputnikNews.com.
Back to Political Misfits, the show that goes against the grain. I'm Bob Schlehuber here, sort of, kind of with Jamarl Thomas. We continue to bring you live programming here Monday through Friday. We're here 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Big shout out to our radio engineers keeping us live while Jamarl and I continue to social distance ourselves as we stay at home here. Week 10, 11, 12, not quite sure. It seems like all a blur, Jamarl Thomas, but we're thankful that we continue to be with all of you misfits out there listening. Give us a call, 202-521-1320. That's 202-521-1320. If you're radio shy, you can tweet us questions at Sputnik Misfits, and you can also listen and comment at the Progressive Soapbox YouTube channel and see Jamarl's beautiful face. Hopefully he's got a photo up of me in case you're missing me out there as well. We continue our conversation now talking about the ongoing protests across the United States and additional charges being brought against officers in Minneapolis involved in the death of George Floyd. We're joined by Nicole Roussel, a Sputnik News analyst and producer of the great show Loud and Clear with Brian Becker and John Kiriakou. Nicole, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, you guys.
Cole, I wanted to play a clip last night from a young protester I had the chance to walk with during the march there, well past the curfew. And I was walking and talking with this protester named Wedge, a 26-year-old system designer for Best Buy. And I asked how long he planned to stay out past curfew. And he said as long as things stayed peaceful. I asked what he meant by that. What was peaceful and what was not peaceful? Let's have a listen to hear what he said.
And that's obviously justified. But what I consider a peaceful protest versus a non-peaceful protest is when police engage protesters. That's what ultimately makes it a non-peaceful protest. Even if we're throwing water bottles or, whatever, they're shooting bullets, they're shooting flashbangs, they're throwing at us that, we don't have, the capabilities to deal with this. So, I mean, that's honestly my opinion in terms of like we're walking peacefully and they're going to start, arresting people just for being out past curfew. It's unjust. It's not constitutional, and I won't stand for it.
Yeah, Nicole, I mean, it gives me tingles to feel that right there. So often we think about peaceful protests being solely aimed at the protesters needing to stay peaceful. But what he was saying, peaceful, not peaceful, it was going to be not peaceful once the police escalated things. I was out well into the evening on Monday night, and the escalation came when the police dropped a huge helicopter on top of the people about 100 feet above their heads. That didn't feel very peaceful to me. And so often we always kind of point at the protesters of being the ones that needed to stay peaceful. You had a very enlightening experience about what it looks like when police turn unpeaceful themselves. Tell us a little bit more about what happened to you the other day here in Washington, D.C. as you were covering the protest near the White House.
Yeah, exactly, Bob. I was Monday night right up at the White House on H Street Northwest. I believe several of you all were out there as well. And, so we all were completely shocked when all of a sudden, I mean, without audible warning, even being as close as I was to the White House, right on H Street Northwest, right where the White House was, right where all of those different police agencies were out, very suddenly, a huge number of police in full riot gear with batons, with their shields, come storming at protesters. And I run towards to try to film what's going on. I have my Sputnik press badge on. It's a big orange badge. And I'm filming people getting maced directly in the eyes. I'm filming these riot police shoving people down, yelling, move back, move back, move back, and then just shoving people down, trampling them. In the meantime, this enormous number of military police have lined up behind the safety of the Lafayette Park fence and are rattling the fence, banging on it loudly with batons. So I'm filming all of this, and the police continue to move aggressively, sometimes running, sometimes walking quickly toward the peaceful protesters who just moments ago were kneeling, we're peacefully chanting the names of those who have been killed by police, most recently George Floyd, for example, Breonna Taylor. And at some point, the police line gets close to me and they yell, move back, move back. I'm looking directly into the eyes of a policeman in riot gear, and he yells, move back. And I hold my press badge up and say, I'm pressed. And he yells, move back again. And then within moments, the military police from the side have barraged me with stinger grenades. So I was hit I have 7 hits on my body that are bruised, raised welts on my torso, on my back. At some point, I don't think it was then, but a little bit later, I was hit with a rubber bullet on my legs. It's ripped up and bloody. And then moments later, another riot police, as I'm still trying to film, another policeman in riot gear uses his shield to shove me onto the asphalt, where I hit my ribs and my elbow and my back, which are all bruised and in a good amount of pain now here in the week. They're doing this to protesters. They're doing this to press. Again, I have verbally said I'm pressed multiple times, and I have held my badge up for people to see. And yet, it's not the police, of course, after this violence who's helping anybody up. It's the protesters. It's the protester medic. I think everybody who was there at that time, which again was hundreds of people, maybe thousands of protesters at the White House on Monday evening. They all knew that it was the police who were instigating this violence. It was not the protesters. In the midst of this, protesters say, hands up, don't shoot, hands up, don't shoot, and yet are coated in tear gas, are pepper sprayed, are mace, they're flashbang grenades thrown at our feet, and the violence continued for many minutes.
Yeah, I mean, it reminded me a lot of when I was in Israel covering the move of the U.S. embassy there to Jerusalem, Israel, Palestine. And when you showed your press badge or your media badge, it was like, didn't even register with the soldiers and the military personnel there at the protest, and they start pushing you. And that was the first time I've ever experienced that here in Washington, D.C. I think it was Sunday night, maybe Monday night. It's all blurring together now, where we as press were basically on a block in downtown DC near the White House, and we got kettled, basically, where you have military police and riot police come in from both directions at you, and they start yelling at you, move back, move back. Well, if you move back, you just move back into the people that are yelling to move back the other way, and it makes no sense to you, and it creates a sense of chaos. And in that situation, when we were kettled, basically completely surrounded, we were nowhere able to go. We had maybe 50 protesters with almost 50 media, just happened to be all in that kind of same little location. And the media had to yell and scream collectively until the police would actually let them out. And they gave one loud warning to the media. You had one opportunity to leave the scene unless you would be arrested. And so, Nicole, again, set aside of protesters, this idea that America, democracy, freedom of speech, media, all of that stuff, there's nothing more sacred than that. Here we are in a situation where the police are just not even comprehending, not even processing, not even listening when you say, I am the media. That, to me, is terrifying, because it really shows where the mindset of the military and the police are right now.
Yeah, and I want to point out, this was in no way only me that this happened to, right? Again, you guys experienced this as well, a lot of the tear gassing. Sean Blackman, who is a co-host of By Any Means Necessary, had a flashbang grenade thrown at his feet. He was filming the whole time, with dealing with tear gas, choking, coughing. There's also a lot of footage going around that I encourage your listeners to look up, of a journalist by Amelia Brace. She's an Australian journalist, and there's footage of her cameraman being barreled into by the police. There's a piece in the Washington Post that outlines a lot of interviews with a lot of different people who were there that night. And the journalist Brace is quoted by saying, I've had a very similar experience that I did. She says, I made eye contact with an officer and held out my press pass. I kept screaming, media, media. And then he barreled into my cameraman. His shield hit my cameraman's chest, and then the officer punched him. We started to run. These are accounts that, these are direct hits complete trampling of our very basic rights as press to cover what's going on, and especially to cover the government. That's why free media was started in the first place, right? The whole goal of free press is to be able to cover what the government is doing to its people. And so this was such a horrendous, premeditated, violent assault on protesters and press alike. And all, of course, for basically a photo op for President Trump to be able to walk across and walk to a church and get his photo taken with a Bible.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff is fascinating to me. Last night about 1 a.m. when I was there, I was just walking away when tear gas was actually shot at the crowd, and about 2 minutes after, I tried to head back into the crowd as the smoke cleared, and all I can just think of as people are like throwing up on the sidewalk, people are coughing. An ambulance had to be called for one person. And obviously, it's a much different scene in a war zone in Syria. But all of this talk about, Assad gassed his own people. I can't believe a government would gas their own people. How dare all these other people around the world be in these? And it's like, oh my gosh, we're gassing people from the nation's capital, right blocks from the center of power. We're gassing our own people. I don't get how to shake people. I hope they go and look at the videos we posted on our Political Misfits Twitter page. What is that to people? I mean, is that not outrageous to people? Are people not waking up to that people peacefully standing there last night were gassed and pepper sprayed by their government? And to your point, Nicole, there is no accountability for these police officers. I definitely don't think they're going to be held accountable for shooting you in the leg. Hopefully they are, and others are held accountable. But we're seeing the same kind of rhetoric coming out of Minneapolis now, where Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison has said that he plans to charge all 4 officers who were present at George Floyd's death. But then when you actually read on in these stories, and he actually says he's going to hold them to, quote, the highest degree of accountability that the law and the facts will support. So even though these 3 men basically watched their fellow colleague, not basically, they watched their colleague kneel on and kill a man, they're probably most likely not ever actually going to be held to account themselves. And I say held to account from our standards, Nicole, not from any kind of police standards. They might be put on desk duty, administrative leave, have to go get hired in a different district. But again, it kind of goes, what is accountability in these situations? And sure, maybe one officer is slapped on the wrist who pushed the journalist to the ground, but there is no large scale accountability for the entire police force. And my fear is that we'll often just kind of focus in on one officer, even if he's found guilty on some types of charges, then it's going to be thrown to the masses and say, look, he found justice. Well, that's not justice for all. That's just justice for one. And I think people are trying to fight for something much larger now.
I think that was really well said, Bob. I couldn't agree more because, when we look back over the last, 5 years or so, I guess 6 years or so, where the Black Lives Matter movement began in the summer of, I think it was 2014 with the death of Eric Garner. Daniel Pantaleo was investigated. That was the cop who strangled Eric Garner to death. Eric Garner, of course, his last words were, "I can't breathe," just like George Floyd. Daniel Pantaleo was investigated on a number of different levels in different localities and different, areas of the government. And, the worst thing that happened to him is that he lost his job. So when we look across and we see how many police have, not even ever had these cases, there are many police killers out there that have not had their cases publicized. They're going about their business on a day-to-day basis, continuing to brutalize people. And it makes it really clear that, that there aren't just a couple of bad apples who need punishment. This is actually the entire system, the entire policing system that must be completely changed, completely eradicated and brought back in a different way, or just completely eradicated, because, we're seeing this in all these different cities. I think some people were shocked to see in Minneapolis, a Midwestern, mostly white city, to have this happen. There's there's a misunderstanding in this country that the South is the only place that's racist, but we see this kind of systemic racism, this kind of systemic terror in places like Ferguson, Missouri, in places like Minneapolis. And it just really goes to show that it's not just New York City that has stop and frisk problems. It's not just the Deep South that has racism. This is actually a really systemic and ingrained and I think intentional problem that's happening here.
Yeah, and I think it's a time where the international community, along with a lot of Americans, are saying, wait a second, there's a huge race issue. And obviously we cover these issues constantly on our program. And it's one that we cover not just when there is a heightened kind of moment of crisis like we're seeing right now, but these are longstanding, century-old issues that have gone so longly unaddressed that hopefully now, I don't know what it necessarily looks like, if there's some type of large movement to defund the police or what comes from this. But again, we find ourselves in the same place. Where we go from here now is the question. With that, though, we are out of time with Nicole Roussel. Nicole, you co-produced a fantastic show, Loud and Clear, with John Kiriakou and Brian Becker on Radio Sputnik from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. What can people expect to hear from your show today if they get the chance to tune in?
Yeah, I hope people do tune in. We're going to be talking about the basic bird's eye view politics of these protests and where these protests are going. And then we're also going to be interviewing some people who were dealing with all of the huge problems in New York last night, where there was this curfew, but subway stations were closed, tunnels were closed, Lincoln Tunnel was shut down, Uber was shut down, all of those huge issues, as well as, the history of protest movements and how important they've been. So when people are brutalized in protests, like happened on Monday, what's happened in the past, if that's gone on, and how people continue to rise up despite the brutalization, because these issues are so important to our very lives.
That's fantastic. That was Nicole Roussel here with Radio Sputnik. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in D.C. We're back after this.
This is Dominic Carter, a political reporter in New York for Verizon Files TV News.
This is Dr. Bill Honigman of Progressive Democrats of America, PDAmerica.org.
Hey, everybody, my name is Tim Black of The Tim Black Show.
This is Tom Luongo of Gold Coast and Guns.
Hello, this is Benny Johnson.
Hi, this is Juanita Broderick, author of You'd Better Put Some Ice on That.
This is Jamal Thomas from the Progressive Soapbox.
Hey, this is Raheem from D.C.
This is Rachel Blevins, a correspondent with RT America, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
When I'm waking up in the morning, I'm looking for what's on the queue for the day. I tune to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
The wokest radio show for your wokest AM.
These guys are the best in the business and experts when it comes to policy.
They're bringing you the top headlines with an angle that you won't see in the mainstream media.
Fault Lines is the greatest show on the radio. I enjoy immensely talking with Lee and Garland. They always treat me from either side with due respect, and it's a wonderful conversation.
The best morning news show in America. Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
Lee and Garland speak truth to power from the depths of the swamp itself, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamal Thomas. We've been talking to a member of the press about violence she experienced there in front of the White House this week, Nicole Roussel. I also had the opportunity to be down there quite a bit and get a chance to talk to quite a few different folks. We'll bring you some of those voices now. We'd also love to hear directly from you. Give us a call, 202-521-1320. Jamal, it was a long evening here last night in Washington, D.C. I was actually on my way to protest last night after the 7 p.m. curfew, and I biked by the most incredible voting line at one of the voting locations around 8 p.m. And yes, the polls last night closed at 8 p.m., so I was a little bit confused to see that line there had wrapped around roughly, I think, 3 or 4 corners into the streets. And I was asking people how long they had been standing there. They said almost 3 hours at that point. And voting eventually got done at 11 p.m. This was due to the coronavirus, D.C.'s brain dump 7 p.m. curfew on election night. Thank you, Mayor Muriel Bowser and the Board of Elections' failure to timely deliver absentee ballot to people's homes. Jamal, many people said they requested the ballots. They looked to fill out the ballots. They had no desire to be there in line, but they had to turn out because no ballot came. What else is there to do? And so I had plenty of time to chat with folks. They were more than happy to have long conversations. They ran out of people to call, people to message, and their phones were dying. And so I was almost a salvation to some people to chat to them about local politics and what was happening on the national scene. It was quite also an interesting moment at the intersection of events happening in Washington, D.C. About 10:45 p.m., Jamal, as I was standing there talking and interviewing people as they were waiting to vote. About 1,000 some protesters were marching down the street chanting Black Lives Matter and hands up, don't shoot. in defiance of that 7 p.m. curfew. They were also chanting, "This is what democracy looks like," which was fascinating to have people protesting, chanting, "This is what democracy looks like," while they protested by people that were voting. I had the chance, Jamal, to ask folks about whether or not they were motivated and thinking more about issues of race or class in that moment, something we had thought extensively and talked extensively about. Many of those protests and marching were, though, Jamal, solely focused on the issue of race following the killing of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor. I spoke to Aiden, a 21-year-old IT worker who was leading portions of the protest march on Monday night, about the current movement and what kept him coming out on the streets well past curfew. Here's Aiden.
Right now, this whole movement is about race, right? It's about the injustice that one of the biggest races in America is facing day-to-day basis. So I think the main reason why people gather here is race. And they're just kind of pushing forward to kind of get to treat that better, right? And help people accountable for their actions, of course.
Yeah, and Jamal, for others, though, like Chef Aji Abbott, the executive chef and owner of the famed Ooze and Oz on U Street in D.C., who was open well past curfew as an essential business and who had a front row seat to the protest and the voting queue, was thinking more about the economy and the long history between those who have and those who have not. Here's Chef Aji.
I mean, honestly, I believe that there always has been, there's a wealthy and then there's poor. There's two. In the middle, they've created a facade of a middle class. It's been created the way it's a separatist thing where it's black versus white and Asian and Spanish Mexican or and any other, you know, ethnicities that are considered, you know, in the middle, and we're all fighting for a dollar. We're all trying to get ahead, right? But the one thing that stays consistent is the wealthy continue to get more wealthy and the poor people continue to get more poor.
And Jamal, for Chef Aji, race was a distraction and part of an obstacle course established by those with wealth and power to keep poor people from becoming rich, or at least upsetting their place on top. Here's more from Chef Aji.
But we all have to really understand that we're all trying to do the same thing. So we're all the same. There's no difference. We're all trying to get wealthy, right? We're all trying to be on the top, like the wealthy people that are at the top. But the wealthy people at the top aren't going to displace their position. So they create a lot of times a lot of things to put in your place. You got obstacles. It's an obstacle course to get wealthy. I mean, now can you traverse the obstacle course and get wealthy?
And while some last night were more focused on race and some on class, many like Crystal, a Howard University student who had queued for over 4 hours to vote, was more than aware of the intersection of the two and urged that people pay more attention to what is happening. Here is Crystal.
These different topics, but as an African-American student, I'm aware of these every single day. So I always have to keep in mind my class. I always have to keep in mind my race, my position in this government. And it's important, and I implore all of my fellow Americans that they need to be aware now. As you said, yes, this isn't something that is new. This is just something that's being more covered. So I implore you, pay attention to what's being covered.
Yeah, and Jamal, the conversations last night for me illuminate the fact that the movement that is needed, the one that would dramatically alter the current capitalistic and racist system in the United States, will need to be able to speak to race, class, and the intersection of race and class. Obviously, people understand that there's a deep intersection between race and class, but people's focus and starting points are different. That, for me, is the challenge that the left needs to rise to. How do we find that voice, Jamal, one that can speak to those who say, hey, it's just race, those who speak to just class issues, and then that intersection? And that, for me, is a remarkable challenge. It's the JFK going to the moon kind of conversation. It's something that maybe I can't necessarily articulate. I'm not even sure what that looks like, but I think that is what is needed.
Yeah, that's not. That conversation is only easy if you just accept people as people. I mean, the moment that you get into trying to understand a cultural experience from somebody else, everybody have their own particular experience, right? They have their own window into the way we operate in our society and how we, I guess, see ourselves in that society. This kind of feedback mechanism between the two. But that's not easy to kind of parse through. But at the end of the day, 99.999% of people basically want to live, take care of their kids, raise their family, live their life, not necessarily get into too much trouble. You have a small faction that, for the most part, don't want to do that and want to make other people's lives miserable. One of the catches, though, that the gentleman said, I think it was the second one, where he said everyone wants to get wealthy and wealthy put up roadblocks in your pathway. I agree with half of that. There's no point to existence. Like none. The pursuit of wealth is just contrived. There's no there to it. I mean,
but isn't that, it gets to the point maybe in talking to him longer, is that in a capitalist system that it's so predicated on this idea of making money.
Yes.
We were talking about how people are in such a rush to get to work to make money that they'll hit a pedestrian crossing the street.
No,
They're
that's
so
true.
busy.
But
so that in a system that's been kind of brainwashed or controlled, that many people have been just completely put into this one path. Make money is the whole point of it, which is kind of what you're saying.
Yeah,
That's
it's
like
a religious belief. I mean, there's no value in it. I mean, the value in it is only, access to your needs and everything else, but there's no reality to it. It's just this kind of religious belief that people have accumulated or just have taken on. But it makes sense. I mean, it wouldn't necessarily have been, it wouldn't have stayed for all of these years if it didn't have a logic to it in the way that it worked in order to make some rich and other people poor. But I guess my basic point is there's no point to this. Like, it's no point to existence. That stuff is chosen. Our society doesn't have to have a situation where everybody tries to get rich and die trying. I mean, we don't even have enough resources for people to do that. Like, you're talking about a fundamentally different way of looking at how we operate in the world with the notion of sustainability, not infinite growth that doesn't quite exist. But just on the last point, the conversation about race and class, like I said, I tend to trend towards class because that's one of those things that you can wrap your hands around. I can ameliorate people's ability with their worst aspects, meaning if you need healthcare, okay, we can do something about that. If you need to ensure that you're going to not die, after you get a certain age because you don't have access to the things you need, we can do that. Like, those are tangible things that I can wrap my hand around where you can put through policy or, hell, give them cash in order to just make that part work. The other part that's more complicated is how do you bleed out this notion of people who are just racist? Sometimes it's implicit, sometimes it's explicit. But if my doctor is not giving me pain meds because he has some kind of implicit bias against me and thinks that blacks lie about being in pain, how can I even get to that? You know what I mean? Like, that's not...
No, I mean, I guess I hear you. I just can't imagine talking to a lot of the protesters last night who were like, it's race. Yeah. And then how do you come to them and say, no, I totally hear you, but like, let's do the class thing. They're just going to completely ignore you and they're just going to keep marching. And so actually to stop and get that person's attention. And that's a challenge when it comes to political education. Talking to a lot of these young people who have not had experience protesting, there is a lack of education taking place within certain populations. And obviously it's by design. The less educated a populace is, the more people in power can maintain control and power. And I think that's where Sanders' movement and the left has failed, is to do that deep-rooted political education and reach out to the masses. It's an incredible undertaking. It's incredibly hard. I'm not saying that they should have or could have or it's super easy or something, but we got to address that if the left ever wants to win again. On the issue of purpose, Jamal, I know we talked about that often.
Let me respond to that real quick, because you said something that's on point that you're infinitely right on. Because I misunderstood
you can stop me anytime if you ever want to tell me I'm right. So yeah, please.
Yeah, infinitely right, absolutely right to 1,000%. So when you made the point of how do you make that conversation where people are like, it's about race, it's about race, it's about race, and you can't fault them. I mean, for the entire time of their life, the Democratic Party has only talked about race. They haven't done class. Class was off the table in regards to politics. It was only the last 8 years that this issue of class and finances and wealth, that stuff was on the table. Up to that point, it wasn't there. Meaning their political understanding is going to be based on this notion of identities. So your question is, how do you make that link between how their identity is connected and also how the capitalist system screws them over and other people over of that particular identity, and how to make that click? That's your question. I think that's an awesome question. I think that's where it needs to go if you're going to make that link and pull people who are just basically Democrats into your fold.
Yeah, let's get a caller in here. Aaron is with us. You can call in as well. Give us a call, 202-521-1320 here on Radio Sputnik. We turn to Aaron. Aaron, thank you for calling in. What's on your mind today?
Hey, guys. I wanted to talk about the riots. I live in New York City, so obviously there's been quite a bit of looting and protests going on in general. But I just wanted to call back to remember how... originally, the Civil Rights Act was passed It came immediately after King's assassination, 1968, April 4th. And after King's assassination, there were riots all across the country, lots of looting, arson like we see now. So the idea that peaceful protests are enough to create change, I don't think is true. You have to have that component that makes people uncomfortable and upsets the system, or else it won't budge on anything.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron, for the call. I really appreciate it. Please call back anytime. Jamal, I couldn't agree more. You need people to feel uncomfortable. Obviously, history whitewashes every movement and only focuses on the nonviolent stuff. And people are always basically implored to call for nonviolence after people are killed. I mean, it's interesting looking at the word riot. I'm really working on my vernacular and the language I use. Is it a riot? Is it an uprising? Is it a looting? Or is it a response of whatever you want to call it? And you think about riot, I mean, the basic definition is a violent disturbance of the peace by a crowd. But when police shoot tear gas onto a peaceful crowd, they're disturbing the peace. When when somebody killed Dr. King, and I'm going to point fingers at the FBI, when the crowd of police converged together to collectively kill Dr. King, a man who was espousing peaceful means, were they not rioting? Can the police not riot? And when you think about looting, we obviously have a negative connotation towards that, and we direct that at certain crowds, at the Antifa crowd in the black bloc, or young black kids with rocks, and that's the looting. But obviously, if you go to the Smithsonian museums that are lining the nation's capital, plenty of those antiques and art were looted and stolen. Go to the British National Museum. All of that was looted. So it's okay for police, it's okay for governments to loot and riot, but the second the people do it, who are supposedly the ones who make up the government, then it's completely not allowed.
Well, the thing is, and people sometimes get this twisted, there's no higher order of magnitude in regards to justification for violence. Meaning, you might be able to push off an attacker in that sense, in which case, yes, you did this because you were trying to stop something else. But basically, violence is self-justifying. I mean, if you think of the way governments behave, or if the way mobs behave, it's self-justifying. It justifies itself. The very act of having force, where you can apply it, and the weaker party can't necessarily stop you from doing it, is the thing that allows it to take place. The rule set basically conforms to that reality. Meaning, we follow a law that many people don't necessarily agree with. We allow cops to basically beat and batter peaceful protesters, people who are just standing there doing nothing, and we accept that as being okay, and the protesters will stand there and get beaten. Because in their mind, they're the sovereign, they can dispense force legally, and I have to stand here and accept it. But if they didn't have to accept it, they wouldn't. I mean, that's kind of my point. It's the whole force justification is just, there's no cosmic thing that says this is justified. It's basically your society has the ability to beat and injure you into submission for you to accept that rule set.
Yeah, and we have another caller here, Baltimore Charles, and while we have him on the line, I'll just say to that point here, it's so often people are on Facebook or in white circles and stuff saying, how dare these people loot? How dare they do this? And it's all this kind of moral high ground that people want to take right now. But it's like, one, you're a white person in a white supremacist society that has favored you forever. You have no idea what these people are feeling. And two, instead of just kind of telling them what you think they should or shouldn't do, why not try to educate people and say, look, here's a range of different options. Here's a range of different things you can do. You have the ability to pick what you want to do. I don't think I, as a white person, should ever tell a black person who's feeling anger and pain in this country right now what they should do. If I feel like there's anything I can do, I can simply present a range of options. If you don't want them to loot, then give them 10 other options, and good luck finding 10 other options for young black people in this country right now. Education is cut off because it's underfunded in their communities. There's not great job and employment opportunities for people, especially close to their home. They don't have good health care. There's not recreation centers or community programs or homes or restaurants or businesses designed for them. I mean, give them other options, and then you'll soon figure out they don't have many other options. And simply you come back to just telling them what they can and can't do. It really angers me and upsets me. Baltimore Charles, thanks for being with us. I know these things upset you. I greatly appreciate your time and to call in here to Political Misfits. What's on your mind today?
Thank you, my friends. And let me say that I enjoy your analysis. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. I just want to try to be ill here, if I can, as a seasoned African American. As Joseph Ben Yaakman, the great black Jew, said, you thought when you came to America, you thought you came to the melting pot. Actually came to the boiling pot. And Well, I want to follow that up with on Nicole and Sean. I'm terribly sorry that you have a dose of reality. This is what fascism is all out, and I want to just go further to say that if I don't agree with everything that James Carville, the political analyst, said, but he once said that between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, it's just like Alabama. Well, I can make that same assertion or that same comment about every state in America. And Minnesota should teach us that, as well as my home state of Maryland. You can go New York, Minnesota, places that are up north or down south, and you will find within those states places that are just like Alabama, and people think that way. Ironically, I'm just want to close with this, that it also comes to mind that Donald J. Trump and his regime said that they were going to federalize the Washington, D.C. Police Department.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of power does that say that the mayor or the city council of Washington, D.C. have? She might as well step aside, become a figurehead, a token, and they have no power when the federal government wants to come in under somebody like Trump and want to take control.
Yeah, Baltimore Charles, thank you as always for your call. We'll let you go and continue the conversation here on Political Misfits. Give us a call, 202-521-1320. Yeah, Jamal, I mean, that was the kind of irony of the kind of powerful moment where you saw people standing there in line to vote last night, as well as in the protesters chanting, "This is what democracy looks like." And for me, protest and voting are integral to a democracy, but then we're in the nation's capital, a territory, a colony of Washington, of the United States, right? We don't have statehood here. My budget is eventually it has to be approved by Congress. I don't have voting rights in Congress. So clearly I don't live in a democracy, right? Like that's not how that works. So quite a remarkable moment. Donald Trump is able to federalize the D.C. police, which would be an incredible turn. I don't think that's going to happen. Mark Esper, the defense secretary, saying he does not support active duty military forces to help quell countrywide unrest. Jamal, I did want to just talk briefly here. We have about 5-10 minutes left here before the end of our first hour about this new Reuters Ipsos poll that is out talking about how Donald Trump's handling the protests so far. More than 55% of Americans said they disapproved of Trump's handling of the protests, including 40% who strongly disapproved, while just one-third said they approved, lower than his overall job approval of 39%. So in that comment there, you heard 39%. It's fallen below 40%, a plus or minus on the poll of about 4%. So it could be outside the margin. It's outside the margin of error that it's above 40% still, but a lot of unrest. Among Republicans here now, Jamal, only 67% said they approved of the way Trump had responded to the protests, significally lower than 82% who liked his overall job performance. Wow. So maybe the numbers starting to stack against Trump. I mean, I've been focused on the protests the last 5 days of the coronavirus, and my God, seeing the number of police and number of protesters without face masks and even paying attention whatsoever, I try to stay a good 10, 20 feet back from any of the crowds and always moving at a distance myself. But obviously the numbers were starting to push against him, and obviously the numbers now with the handling of these protests pushing against him as well. I'm curious what you make of it, Jamal.
Yeah, I'm shocked by that last number. I would have thought Republicans would have been less sympathetic, to be honest. I mean, I suppose watching a man get choked to death has, digs in you, whether you're Republican or not. And I suppose the hardcore ones who says, yes, I think Donald Trump has been doing everything right in the way he's been handling this, that's his base. Everybody else are somewhere on that political gradient where even if they're right-wingers, because, what they say, 80% approval rating in regards to from Republicans and how he was doing his job, but this one was much less. Well, that means that people say, yes, I generally approve of him. By the same token, I don't like the way he's handling this situation. That's interesting. Yeah.
And people need to remember, it's not like he won he lost the popular vote. It's not like he won the Electoral College by a huge margin. And so if you start losing, sounds like not a lot, 15% in this situation. If you start picking off some of Trump's base, and that's the only thing that Joe Biden and the Democrats are going to be able to do is kind of suppress the Republican vote through actions like this. They're not going to be able to pull people out through any exciting policy. They just don't have policy. Their strategy is pretty much make it a referendum on Trump. That's all they need is a few more movements such as this. We do have another caller on the line. Trudy, you wanted to talk about passive resistance. Tell us a little bit more what's on your mind.
What's going on, Trudy?
Hello. Hi. Hi, Jamaro. Hello, Bob. I remember the civil rights marches with Dr. King, and I remember that they never did get violent. It was the cops that got violent all the time.
That's right.
And my mother was kind of racist up until that point. And when she saw them putting the dogs on people and fire hoses and all the horrible violence perpetrated against the people, it changed her heart. And my sister, who's a super Trump Republican, has been very, very upset by Floyd's death and how it happened. And if you remember the pictures of Bernie being hauled away from his protest when he was young, he was dragging his legs. People would lay down in the streets. They didn't, or just sit down. There was a lot of sit-ins. And those tactics were all really effective because it highlighted the wrongness of the system.
Yeah. Trudy, thank you so much for the call. And I think you're absolutely right. People are seeing these horrific images, military helicopters being brought down on top of people, the tear gas, the pepper spray, the shooting of rubber bullets at reporters. Jamal, I just want to slide in one last story. We had just a jam-packed show today. We do have another hour, but I wanted to get to this. Eric Garcetti, the mayor of L.A., had the audacity to come out and take a kneel with protesters yesterday, saying that he was with them, he hears them, and talking about the pain that the city is feeling. I just got to say that what a PR stunt. It was completely disgusting. This is a mayor who over the weekend acknowledged that his city was working with other Democratic mayors across the city, and they were collaborating with federal and state fusion centers. Fusion centers are gathering points for information that are gathering and sharing by multiple law enforcement agencies. On top of that, Garcetti had to defend his chief of police, who had said on Monday, quote, "We didn't have protests last night. We had criminal acts. We didn't have people mourning the death of this man, George Floyd. We had people capitalizing. His death is on their hands as much as it is on the officers."
Wow.
More, the police chief there apologized minutes later, saying he misspoke when I said his blood is on their hands and that he regretted this characterization, but more than doubled down saying, "But I don't regret, nor will I apologize to those who are out there today committing violence, destroying lives and livelihoods, and are creating this destruction. His memory deserves reform. His memory deserves a better Los Angeles, a better United States, and a better world." We talked about reform's not a real thing. You need to defund the police. There is no reforming a system that is so deeply corrupt, deeply racist, and deeply entrenched in centuries-old culture. It's not about reform. It's about defunding it. So what did Garcetti do? He defended his mayor, and on June 1st, 2 days ago, Garcetti put in his budget proposal to the Los Angeles Council, who basically said, yep, you can pass it. We're not going to vote against it. In the budget, it included $1.86 billion. That's a billion with a B, billion, $1.86 billion to the Los Angeles Police Department, increasing the LAPD's budget by nearly $120 million, Jamar. $120 million in a time of economic uncertainty, not sure where money's going to come from, and he somehow is able to increase the budget while taking a knee. Jamar, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah, that's called irony. That's called good old-fashioned political irony. I mean, these guys have been taking these photo shots, though. I mean, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, all of these people. I mean, Kamala Harris literally kept a man in prison on death row that she knew was innocent, and she's out there acting as if, you know, she's the progressive prosecutor that's holding back the system. Joe Biden built the crime bill. I mean, you know, our criminal justice system in large part is part of that. And thank you, Michelle Warren, also taking her dog
Liz
out
Warren.
with her
Liz Warren,
to the
thanks to
protest.
Michelle. Senator Liz Warren out there walking her dog during the time of it's just, I can't, Jamal. Let's take a break, Jamal. I got to take a breather. We're at the end of our first hour in Political Misfits. In our second hour, we'll look at the international solidarity, Black Lives Matter protests that are finding their way in England, the latest from Julian Assange's trial. In our weekly Revelation segment, we learn about just how little your elected officials care about you. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in D.C. We're back after this.
Listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. We have a lot to cover for you in this hour, a loaded show. We're going to have an update on political prisoner and journalist Julian Assange, and we're going to have our famed Revelations segment. As always, your chats, calls, tweets are appreciated. You can reach us at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Also, if you guys are digging what we were putting down, give us the like, share this content, and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already hit the button. So, after Donald Trump's unhinged speech yesterday in the Rose Garden, followed by the violent gassing and naked aggression of the National Guard and militarized police force, basically given license to unleash on civilian population by the Attorney General Bill Barr, a day later, the protests swelled not just in D.C., but across all 50 states, in direct repudiation of Donald Trump and that declaration of war on the population. Thing is, the uprising is not limited to the United States. The George Floyd murder ignited a spark that went around the world with millions coming out to march in cities all over Europe. Amsterdam, the UK, Germany, France, even New Zealand. I've never even been to New Zealand and they've been out there marching. The question is, what of George's experience here in the United States? Do people and for that matter, people of color in the United States, do the people in these various countries identify with so fervently that they are willing to come out in the elements and march and show solidarity with that person? To discuss, we're joined by Mohammed Almazi, journalist and contributor to the numerous outlets, including The Canary, Interregnum.net, and Sputnik International. Mohammed, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So let's start with that last finishing thought for the moment. All of these people marching, I've never seen anything like this, where so many people from across the world and all of these other nations are coming out to march for something like this. I mean, police kill a lot of people every year. I think it was like 1,000 people last year. 24% were African American, meaning the disproportionate share. And so my thought was like, what of this one that's doing it? And what of that person's experience do they identify with, so much so that they are out there protesting and marching like this in all of these countries abroad?
That's a very interesting question. And when I was out briefly today at Hyde Park, I was asking people why it was that they'd come out. So whenever there was an opportunity to speak to somebody, I'd say, well, why are you out today? I would say that a substantial number of them were from Black and other Black, Asian, or other ethnic minority groups, but there were a lot of people who I suppose would be classified as white. And they had said, a number of them, or pretty much all of them, had said that things have to change. They're there opposing violence and racism from the police. I put it to them, every single person I spoke to. I said, well, in the United States, some people are saying that in Britain they're more civilized. The police are better trained in de-escalation. They're less likely to act aggressively. Racism isn't really a problem. What do you say to that? This is what I would say to people. This is what I asked people today. And to a T, every single one of them said, no, they're just better at hiding it here. Here in the UK, they still have to deal with racism. They still have to deal with violence on the part of the police. So I think there'll be a mixed number of reasons. Part of it is solidarity. It's true, like you say, a lot of people have been killed over the past year, but not all of them have sparked such widespread protests, which have resulted in widespread news coverage, international news coverage. So that's always a factor, isn't it? But then the other aspect, so part of it is the solidarity. Another part of it is a sense of identification with the United States. So lots of the countries, for whatever reason, for better or for worse, a great number of the populations will, they look to the United States. They look to the United States in terms of hope, in terms of possible change, positive change, but also in terms of negative things happening. It is, the single most powerful country on the planet. It's very influential in terms of culture, art, television series, films, etc. Right, soft power, as it were. But then there's also the more local aspect that I'd already sort of mentioned, which is the experiences that many, not all, but many people here and many communities here have at the hands of the police. As one person put it to me a few years ago when I asked them why it is that somebody, despite Mark Dugan being found to have been killed unlawfully, there was no ruling against the police. This is a very famous sort of killing of somebody of Black African descent here in London, which ultimately led to the riot, the London riot. And they said to me, well, look, there's two different experiences, at least, that people have here. Some people here experience a police service, and they really do get a police service. And others experience a police force.
Right there. God, I love that you said that. Because that same dichotomy exists here in the United States, where for the longest time, you would have a situation. The woman who was calling in earlier, Trudy, she made point of saying the people will go and protest back in the 60s, and basically the people who would be violent would be the cops. These guys would be in suits, holding signs, I am a man, that type of stuff, and the cops would get there and actually just, belligerent and violent in this situation. But if people didn't see that, meaning if they didn't see that on television, if they weren't experiencing that on television where they could say, oh my God, look at how they're beating those people, they would never have known it existed. All of these cops would have gotten off. They would have said, okay, there's nothing to see here, folks. When the police interact with me, they interact with me just fine. I don't see the problem. And so you would have this kind of silent experience from one group who people would just say, okay, they're just making it up. It can't be that bad. Where when issues like this happen, I think that it pulls the mask off of that, where you can see that in real terms of like, oh, wow, I guess they were right about X, or I guess they were right about Y. Am I hitting on where I think this is coming from?
Absolutely. Well, there's that other aspect that you refer to in terms of proof. But I would say it goes even beyond that. If there's somebody who's middle class who says, I saw this happen, their testimony is much more likely to be trusted. And if that person is white, it goes a hell of a lot further, right? That's unfortunate, but that's just sort of the reality. So it's like, oh, this white middle class person says it happened. Well, then it must be true, because they have no stake. They're seen as being neutral arbiters if they just say that something has happened between a police officer and somebody who's black, as opposed to somebody who's black, which is like, oh, well, why do you always have to play the race card? That's an expression here, playing the race card, which is interesting because white people apparently never play the race card. That's just something that black people do whenever they mention that, their racialized selves might be a factor in how they're policed. But it's not just race, it's also class. Yeah. So you look at overall, there are large, white working class communities here which have very long periods of incredibly negative experiences at the hands of the police. Infiltration, spying. It's been admitted now, even by the Metropolitan Police Force, that from between the 1960s and 2014, which was the most recent date that we have, they have spied upon and infiltrated over 1,000 organizations here. Lawful organizations, environmental groups, peace groups, anti-militarist groups, arms trade groups, anti-racist organizations, all kinds of working class trade union groups. I mean, that's a whole other thing as well. The police conspiring with with the construction industry to help blacklist people who raise health and safety concerns. So that's a whole other category. People can check out the book Blacklisted. There's a documentary as well you'll find via Real News. That's double E Real, Film Real, rather than Keep It Real. That's an independent outlet here in the UK. And so there's a long history of, the first modern police force is the Metropolitan Police Force. And over 140 years old, if you look at its origins predate its creation. Its origins are all about, infiltrating and subverting movements before they become a big issue, right?
That's interesting. So why? Yeah, that's interesting. So is it that they understand almost inherently that the left is suspicious of organized power in that way, in which case they take proactive action and that goes beyond just their natural purview and their natural job into political action of trying to stop anything that may actually be a hedge or a difficult or create a problem for them in the way they operate in society? Is that what's going on with this?
I would say that's exactly what's going on. I mean, you live in a class-based society, right? Which means that by its very nature, the state exists to both reconcile the class sort of antagonisms, but also to impose the will of one class onto another. And the police exist in order to help facilitate that. So if you have organizations which are seeking to undermine the profit interests of certain aspects of the ruling class, as lots of these things do, environmental concerns, affect capitalism, because capitalism unrestrained destroys the environment. Likewise with the arms trade. And if you look at the origins of policing, you had, all the emergent violence and problems are coming because of industrialization, right? Like just the abject, subjugation of the working class, and people trying to get together and saying they deserve better, and this would lead to protests. And one of the things the police needed to do was to infiltrate and spy upon and subvert these protests. But then black people get it, especially if you see it in terms of stop at searches, stop an account, which I don't know if you have it in the States. Stop an account here is where they don't necessarily search you, but you've got to account for yourself. I've experienced that. That was fun. And the thing is, they know how to do it. They start off being all very polite, right? In terms of their tone, quite often, especially if there's other people around, right? But the point is, if you assert your right, so like I've said, okay, what is the legal basis of the stop? Because you have to have reasonable suspicion that I've committed a crime, or I'm about to commit a crime, or I'm in the process of a crime. And instead of simply saying, well, sir, we were just wandering or whatever it is, they don't answer the question. The police here really do not like the law being cited back to them, even though it is the law and the law enforcement officers.
Well, see, that's the same thing here, though. I mean, when I give you, and I got to be honest, as I listened to that, I thought to myself, oh, wow, if somebody would have said that in the United States, they probably would have gotten hit or abused in some way. I mean, they don't necessarily like you videotaping them, even though that's perfectly legal. They don't like you asserting your rights. And in a situation where there's this cop and his buddy and just you, especially if you guys are alone, asserting your rights is not the easiest thing to do when you don't think you're going to make it out alive, when you have somebody with an itchy trigger finger here in the United States. I mean, this gets to the whole thing of guns in and of itself. I gave a stat earlier saying that I think there were like over 1,000 police killings, and 99% of them going from 2013 to 2019 there were no results, meaning they didn't charge the officer, they didn't do anything, meaning all of these people basically walked. What is accountability like in the UK? I know you guys don't have guns there, so you don't have anywhere near as many killings, but what does accountability look like in the UK's political or, let's say, criminal justice space?
I do want to point out that police here do carry guns. The bobbies don't carry guns. So the everyday cops on the beat, the coppers on the beat, they don't. But we have the armed response unit. I think detectives also get to carry guns. They don't necessarily on the regular, but I think they're allowed to. So our armed response unit, think of them as SWAT, right? So, let's see. 405 road traffic fatalities where the police were involved between 2004 to 2018, 753 apparent suicides. This is just England and Wales I'm speaking about. 753 apparent suicides within 2 days of police custody, including being in police custody, 811 deaths not relating to detention or custody, but also investigated by the IOPC. Like 3 prosecutions, 0 convictions, 1991 and was it 2014? There's a report people can check out called Dying for Justice from the Institute of Race Relations. They can also check out Stopwatch UK, which looks at stopping people being stopped and searched under various laws and rules here, and NetPol, the Network for Police Monitoring. All very good resources that people should check out that examine these issues from different aspects. Here's one case. Sharif Cousins, a founder of a youth charity and former gang member, was shot in the chest. He wasn't arrested afterwards. He was never charged with anything. They were found to have been not the Independent Police Complaint Commission, which has had, I don't know how many different variations in its name since 1977. The Police Complaints Authority, the IPCC, then the Independent Office for Police Conduct, right? If you've got a very good reputation, you don't keep changing your name when you're a regulator. It's, they've said, okay, nothing to see here, that the police officer was acting lawfully when they shot him in the chest. Judah Abundi, 65-year-old race relations advisor for the police, was tasered in the face in Bristol, which is a bit west from London, not too far from Wales, when he was going into his home, having supposedly been mistaken for somebody else. He refused to give his name. He said, no, this keeps happening. I don't need to give you my name, which is true. He wasn't being arrested for anything. And as he was trying to unlock his gate, he was ultimately tasered in the face. Woman who did so, officer who did so, was found not guilty for misconduct and misusing a taser. So it's like in the very rare cases, and last I heard, it was a few years ago when Ian Tomlinson, the news agent, was smacked over the face. He collapsed. He died of a heart attack. The current leader, Labour leader, what's his name? God, I can't believe I've forgotten his name. The neoliberal who's replaced.
You mean Starmer, Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer.
Yeah,
Keir Starmer.
He was the chief prosecutor at the time. It took immense pressure for him to even launch a prosecution. When they did, I mean, some people would argue that they phoned it in. The guy was found not guilty, and it was caught on camera. The guy gets smacked over the head, collapses, dies.
Why does that work? I mean, like in the United States, people have been getting, the perspective of cops in the United States has been changing. I mean, minorly, but changing to this notion that police abuse is an issue. At the very least, over 50% of people saying, yes, we agree with you. We think it's an issue. Of course, Democrats think it's more so. Blacks think it's more so. Republicans, less so. But why does the society accept that? I mean, the 1,000 people, blacks only make up 13% of this population, meaning 24% of that group that got killed. The overwhelming majority are still white. I mean, when we're talking about blacks, we're just talking about like disproportionate. I would imagine the same thing is true in the UK. So why does the society accept a force that does that? Or is it just a segment of the society accepts it and everyone else just has to deal with what that segment accepts?
Well, like you say, I mean, here, black, according to the last census, people categorized as black represent 3.3% of the population, Asian 7.5% of the population. And yet 18% of the deaths in police custody in England and Wales as a result of contact with the police came from a black or other minority ethnic group, right? So 18% versus the 17.5 and 3.3% that they represent. So why? I would take it back to the comment that was made to me previously that I cited, which is some people get a police service and other people get a police force. It's not like the press is constantly covering this. It's not like the BBC tells people here that on average once a week somebody here is going to be killed unarmed, will be killed by the police here. You're more likely to hear about somebody dying at the hands of the police in the United States than, from British media than you will, and it becoming a thing, like a sensation, as it were.
But wait, that's actually a really good point. What is the perspective of the United States from the UK standpoint? I mean, especially if we're talking about criminal justice. I mean, If you ask me, I would say yes, the people in Europe tend to be far more passive in regards to the way they do their policing than the United States. But does Britain understand that? Like, do the people who live there realize that there is somewhat of a difference in the tenor, the aggression, all of those things in the police force here?
I don't know if there's a difference between the French police force. I mean, they are incredibly violent and openly racist. I mean,
fair enough.
Yeah.
Speaking of accountability, by the way, what is the accountability for soldiers? Is it the same thing for the standpoint of police? You wrote a piece, or there was a piece written about basically the International Criminal Court, 1,000 cases being basically discharged criminal investigations into war crimes. And basically, they're giving all of these cases, just punting them. Is accountability for military crimes similar in the accountability for police crimes? Meaning basically, very rarely is anything done in order to go after people who are committing either war crimes or, for that matter, flagrant abuse.
That's a very good point, and I think there are lots of similarities to be raised there. In the case of there were about 1,000 open investigations for alleged Iraq war related war crimes in terms of British involvement. And all but one of them has been dropped, all of them, all but one, but not by the International Criminal Court, by the Services Prosecution Authority, which is in the military in Britain has its own prosecution and its own criminal court system. So everybody else would get their police force and the Crown Prosecution Service, right? But if you're a soldier, you're not prosecuted typically under normal civilian rules. So basically, the military gets to decide for itself. And yes, it would appear that various pressures combined with a nod and a wink from the Prime Minister, and pressure from the more right-wing press as well, has made it a lot easier for these things to just be dropped. So it was announced yesterday or the day before by the head of the Services Prosecution Authority. I think you're speaking on one of the BBC programs, basically saying, these are all going to be dropped now, all the investigations except for one of them, and that one itself may also be dropped. I interviewed somebody from the Peace Pledge Union to ask them what they thought about it. They said they feared that it reflects the power and influence of the armed forces in Britain, that they were able to get this basically sorted partially by pushing this narrative that there's a witch hunt against British soldiers and that there are vexatious claims being, like unjustified prosecutions being brought against them. But no examples are ever raised of these cases. I mean, you're much more likely to face court-martial, I think, if you refuse to serve or if you've decided to become a conscientious objector than if you are implicated in an alleged war crime. So, yes, I would say there's definite similarities or parallels there between.
No, I mean, absolutely. There's a ton of parallels, and obviously having separate courts. I mean, that's what's incredible in the United States. Our military alleged crimes and arrests are prosecuted in one court, and the civilians are prosecuted in another court, which is quite disturbing to see the least. And to come back to the domestic side of things here, Jamal, I mean, Eric Gallagher, the Navy SEAL who just was, horrifically killing people, taking pictures with their bodies. I mean, all the stuff he did. Not only was he let off by Donald Trump, he was celebrated. And that's like a whole other layer. It's not just like finding these people not guilty and then quietly you kind of just push the story aside. It was Donald Trump saying, no, we're going to defy this and actually speak up on it, which again is a whole extra layer of intensity that we're facing right now. We did have a caller on the line, Lamont. Lamont is on the line. Give us a call, 202-521-1320. We want to hear whatever is on your mind. Lamont, are you there?
Yes, I am, guys. What's up?
Hey, what's up, man? What's on your mind? What are you talking about?
All right, good. I was just over the last couple of days or so, I was doing a little bit of research and I happened to come across something very interesting, right? I'm talking about the Crimes Bill of 1994 signed, under Bill Clinton's administration. But it's interesting because, I had a couple of prominent figures on that signed off on that as well. I'm talking about obviously Chuck Schumer, Elliot Engel, Al Gore, just these prominent, Democratic figures. But the reason why I bring this up is because this was but I kind of consider to be, maybe I'm wrong on this, but I consider to be kind of like the foundation of what was to become the private prison industrial complex. If it wasn't in existence already, this kind of surely just propped it up, I think, even more so, because what it was just like a massive incarceration campaign, all out, round them up type of thing, But with that, that also laid the foundation for, the construction of these private prisons, which obviously have been like kind of being ramping up more so, even under this administration, So it's just, and then, but with that, the reason why I bring that up to kind of connect to like what's going on today with all these, the police response to like the civic response by the people and, these writers and things, is because they have now, like they do these things because they're able to do this, okay? And with that, I just want to kind of break into another quick point, is that I feel that once you become an institution, now I have a little trouble explaining this, but this is the best way I can make sense of this. But I believe once you become an institution, okay, then the law favors you. It becomes a thing at that point where there's a set of laws obeyed by a certain class of people, right? If we're talking about class structure now, and then an opposite set of rules for the mass, right? But a couple points to that, I think to myself, in 2014, this was the Burwell versus Hobby Lobby decision by the Supreme Court, 5-4, 5 being conservative majority rule. But it pretty much stated that Hobby Lobby wanted to not partake in allowing women, like reproductive rights. They don't want to pay for women to be able to have access to like a Plan B emergency because they believe that would make them implicit in a woman's murder. And they didn't believe, obviously a conservative organization, but they were against that. So all of a sudden, no problem. Okay, you're exempt from this. The law favors you, no problem. Like, only because in the end they just didn't want women to have access to that. Okay. Yeah. Other examples too, like Citizens United versus the SEC. Everyone knows that. That pretty much stated, you know what? Okay, my money is free speech. Okay, so I could give as much money as a super PAC to any candidate that I want because it's free speech. Yeah. At what point in time do we equate a corporation to an individual having the same rights? You need to reverse.
Yeah, Lamont, sorry to cut you off there. We greatly appreciate you. Have Mohammed Almazi joining us from the UK. We're dialing up our international cost here, calling him abroad, so I want to get back in to him. But Mohammed, Lamont, first of all, thank you for calling. I always appreciate you calling. I love the passion. I love the energy. I love the study, the understanding and educating us here on Political Misfits. That was fantastic. Mohammed, I'm just curious what you have to say about the kind of these rigged systems that have allowed us to continue to stay in these states of oppression.
Well, I think the last caller made a very fair point that when you're an institution, you have, by your nature, more power to influence policy than when you're an individual. But I would say that it depends greatly what the policies you are pursuing. I mean, you could be an institution that is pushing more radical policies. You could even be quite a wealthy institution, maybe a radical labor organization. If the policies you're pushing create too much inertia, too many problems for the sort of ruling system, as it were, then you're less likely to be listened to than you're even a smaller organization, but you're pushing for policies which reinforce establishment status quo, or that may be. So it's not just about your size, it is about the policies you're pushing. Are you pushing against an open door? Pushing against a brick wall?
Yeah. There is a difference. I mean, if you were trying to get some kind of radical action to, for example, let's make sure everyone has health care. You're going to have all sorts of money being pushed against you to stop you from doing that. And like you said, other organizations may be getting involved in order to ensure that the financial interest is maintained. We have about 30 seconds left. Can you give us an update on Assange? The last I heard, he was having difficulty getting to some of the meetings or some of the hearings. He wasn't in good health, and his doctor basically was saying that he didn't want him to even attend those video conferences. What has been going on with the Assange case?
So the judge of this Monday, I attended the hearing, and the judge said, unfortunately, she has yet to be able to confirm a new venue location, a new court building that will be able to hear the next few weeks, part 2 of Assange's extradition case. So that is still to be determined. Assange did not appear via video link during this hearing, as he did appear in the last one. He's on record saying that he has medical advice from a doctor, which says that due to his history of respiratory problems, respiratory infections, that he's at heightened risk of getting a severe COVID, possibly dying. The judge has not accepted that as being a legitimate reason for him not to show up in the video room, which is a common room, even though 2 people have died at Belmarsh prison with COVID-19. So it's definitely broken out in that prison. She says it's down to the prison authorities to manage the health of the prisoners. So if they say it's fine, then it's fine. As has been pointed out to me by one person, they said, well, what did they tell the family members of those people who died of COVID? Did they tell them it's fine? So it's problem is all these prisons are incredibly overcrowded. They're understaffed. They're under-resourced. You have people doubling up in cells that, according to many of the prison governors themselves, aren't even suitable for a single person, let alone for 2 people. So it's not completely clear whether he's staying away because he feels especially unwell, because she did say that was the only reason that he couldn't show up, or if he was away specifically because of the infection of his history and what the doctor has advised him to do.
And Britain is one of the countries that has it worse than many of the other countries in Europe, correct? Especially in the prison systems.
Does appear to be that. I mean, there's so much up and down in terms of the figures, but yeah, the UK is in terms of figures that are out there currently. Yeah, we do seem to have it partly the worst.
With that, we are out of time. Mohammed El-Mazi, journalist and contributor to numerous outlets, including The Canary, to Interregnum.net, and Sputnik International. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you coming on. Up next,
thank you for having me.
Up next is Revelations. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik in DC. We'll be back after this.
Deshaun, what do you want to talk about today? Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am here with my disembodied co-host, Bob Schlehuber. I'll be bringing this picture up shortly. You guys hear that sound? It is Hump Day. That means Revelations. Now, Revelations is one of my favorite segments. Somebody told me when you do UFOs, you look like a younger man. That is true. Today is not going to be UFOs, however, so I may have a little bit more age on me today. But we're going to have a political revelation. A political revelation. This political revelation was utterly and entirely hilarious. Something that people who are somewhat cynical know, but not necessarily something that politicians will all that much tell you. If you guys are digging this content, make sure you like it, share it. You can always reach us at 202-521-1320, 202-521-1320 if you have something on your mind or something you want to say. So let's go into the revelation, the thing that was revealed yesterday. 16-term Congressman Eliot Engel of New York is having a hard go of it this month. First, 2 progressive challengers that were splitting the vote in the race with him for the Bronx and Westchester, one got out the race and backed the other one. Now, the person who's in the race currently is Jamal Bowman. Jamal Bowman is an education activist who is running on a Green New Deal, Medicare for all, getting money out of politics. He's a lefty, and he's running hard as a lefty. And so instead of having the splitting of the vote, Elizabeth Warren, instead of having the splitting of the vote, Elizabeth Warren, these two lefties were able to come together and to merge their forces in order to try to take down the guy who was there for 16 terms. Now, I'm not bitter about that at all. Not bitter in the least. But Engel is doing his best now. He's under pressure. And he feels that heat. And he has to do something in order to make sure that he can stay there for a 17th term. So this energy and excitement under normal circumstances is probably a good thing. However, a little bit overboard. He was trying to get to the lectern, and the borough president, Ruben Diaz, was apparently taking far too long at the mic. And this unfortunate exchange got picked up on the microphone. Let's see the clip of Representative Elliot Engel.
Then I gotta then go down the list, and it's just too many folks here.
But you didn't have a primary, you wouldn't care.
Say that again?
You didn't have a primary, you wouldn't care.
Don't do that to me. We're not gonna do this. We're not gonna.
I hope you could hear that. Basically, he's telling them, look, under normal circumstances, I wouldn't care, but I'm running for re-election. And then the other gentleman, the borough president, says, don't do that to me. That's hilarious. He's basically saying, look, I need to get to the lectern. I need to get to the lectern. I need to say something to the public. I need to say something to the public. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't care. I wouldn't be here this fired up. But I have an election to win. And because I have an election to win, I need to tell the public my piece. So Engel, later on, he explained his comments to the New York One reporter in the context of running for re-election. And I thought it was important for people to know where I stand. That's why I asked to speak. Of course, I care deeply about what's happening in the country. That's why I wanted to convey, I love the Bronx, grew up in the Bronx, lived here all my life. I would not have tried to impose on the borough president if I didn't think it was important. And clearly the borough president did not think what you had to say was important. I'm not saying it was bad. I'm just saying clearly he thought not so much. Bob, I thought this was hilarious. I love the last part. The last part makes this work for me. I know a lot of people focus on the first part where the person is basically saying, look, I need to get to the mic. I wouldn't necessarily care if I wasn't trying to get elected. But that last part where he says, quixotically, don't do that to me. Oh, I love that. I don't even entirely know what that means. Don't do that to me. What is he talking about? What does he believe is taking place to him like right now? What, that he's just trying to get him to move?
Yeah, I just think he doesn't want him to be like, make him look bad or make him seem like he's like the bad guy in this situation. Don't hold me back. Man, I've been to some community events before with politicians, and if the community's upset with that politician, they'll basically just wait him out. They'll make him wait. I mean, I've seen politicians wait like 3 hours at community meetings. Say, oh, no, we'll get to you in a second. Hold on. No, it was really important. Thank you for being here. We'll get to you in a second. And obviously, Engel had to go back and dial for dollars. He wasn't trying to stick around much longer. I mean, it is quite funny there that Engel was caught on tape. But yeah, obviously that's always the thing, right? It's like you turn up on Thanksgiving Day with the turkey, and then you don't see people for another year because you just show up on that day. And then when you need people's votes, that is when you come back out into these communities, and people were not happy to say the least tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, that's to put it mildly. I mean, one of the things that I think people need to really pay attention to right now, like just whether you're on the left, whether you're a Democrat, whether you're independent, whatever you are, look at your political system and ask yourself, in a rational world, if you're in a crisis, what does your political system do? Even if you want to take the Republican Party, the wing of that bird, and you want to say, all right, let's put them to the side for the moment. Let's say I'm just focusing on Democrats because that's the party that basically tells me that they're FDR-like and that they care about healthcare and all of this other stuff. Are they acting rationally? And if they're not acting rationally, why? Now, rationality is not an absolute, right? Rationality is always tethered to something. There's a stake in the ground somewhere where a person is revolving around. But if they are acting rationally in the context of the way they're talking, meaning, yes, we care about the public, we care about healthcare, but we're going to do COBRA. Wait, that doesn't make sense. Yes, we care about the environment. We care about making sure that the world is here for our kids. We believe in science. And then it's like, but we're going to push through these oil things and, Obama becomes God of oil. It's like, that doesn't entirely make sense. If it's not a rational response, even the jobs, 40 million jobs lost. And instead of them saying, like other countries, let's make sure people have 80% of their income, or let's make sure people are intact. Well, they don't do that. They don't. In fact, they're going to let that stuff run out. Those people are going to be getting mass evictions in July. And so when you look at your political system and you get the opportunity to put stress on it, almost like a stress test, and you see, okay, what do these people do under stress? And then the secondary question is, why are they so feckless and weak? And that needs to be, be digging people, because they need to understand that their solutions is not entirely in the political space. Voting for Joe Biden is not going to fix this, if that makes sense. I mean, this is the organizing thing, right? I mean, basically, you often make the argument that this stuff is often local or hyper-local, and that people need to be to some degree in the streets. Well, you got your people in the streets. They're there. The question is, what are we going to do with it while they're there? And can this turn into something that is something more, forceful? And I don't mean forceful in the negative way. I just mean with a certain momentum and energy that can go through a successive change of being able to organize the productive capacities of a large amount of people to that cause, not just on race. And this is why that's why I was so curious about whether or not people were seeing this through the lens of race and class, because if it was both, then you can have this kind of merger that just naturally fits together in bringing these two things together. I mean, Martin Luther King, for example, socialist and, and civil rights leader. But that's not currently how we function. And I don't think, like you said, in the way that the people were talking about it, they were focused more on race. So
I think they were focused on both. I mean, I think it was kind of the intersection of the two. I'm just thinking more about what you're talking about right now, like what sustains movements, and really interested that, we had such a very vocal movement around gay marriage in this country, and sexuality and gender. It still obviously has a long way to go, especially if we think about trans people in this country and Black gay people and the intersections between race and sex. But the sexuality was a huge driver for people out to the polls at one point. And obviously issues of war have driven people out to the polls at times. And there's all these different issues and stuff. And so it's almost like I'm almost siloing ourselves a little bit, like it's race and class, as if there's not all these other issues on top of it. It could be healthcare, it could be education. Obviously, healthcare was this huge driver, and there's class implications, there's race implications, but there also is just kind of the issue of health itself. And so it is really, for me, the larger movement, that kind of sustainable movement, is something that is able to speak to all of those different issues in a collective package that people can get behind. And so I think, again, if it just becomes too much race and it goes down that path, it fizzles out. If it becomes too much class, it goes down that path and fizzles out. It is really kind of the combination of the two, and when they can actually start targeting electoral processes in the voting sphere. I mean, it's just funny, again, angle this kind of, I was here to speak to the Black people, please, can I please have a and it's just like, who are you? If people can push these people out, the Joe Crowleys, the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes, pushing the Crowleys out. Angle's been there forever. Can they push him out? And so that's really what will be interesting tomorrow, how the police and the government will look to repress this. You have the Eric Garcettis taking knees. You have police district leaders taking knees. You have politicians kind of basically shielding the police from their actions. What will be that kind of larger force that pushes these people aside, regardless of how much they try to be repressed?
Oh, and by the way, the larger force that pushes them. Honestly, I think it's economics. I mean, I do think race is going to play a role of it. People are going to take from this movement whatever they need to take from it in order to be out there.
You keep saying economics, but did Sanders not just show that it can't just be? I mean, wasn't his whole thing like, let's focus on economics?
Yeah,
I guess Sanders, take just the next person and the next person, you got to chip away at the wall a little bit to like break through.
Yeah, but that argument assumes that the only reason Sanders lost was entirely because of his argument. Sanders had a lot of other defects that allowed him to lose. It wasn't just that one thing. But I guess my point is
maybe how they went about targeting issues of labor and economics might be the question.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You think of where you are. I mean, most of the stuff that takes place is environmental, right? I mean, when we think of the Russian Revolution, well, people had been dirt poor for a very long time. It wasn't until you had the war, people having guns, and it was the situation that allowed the events to take place in the way that they did. I would say the same thing is true here. Just like when you have something like this that sparks. Well, you also are in the middle of a pandemic. 100,000 people are dead. 3 to 1 from the standpoint of African Americans to whites. You have people making under $40,000 a year that had a job in February. Like 40% are out of a job now. 40 million people out of a job. The number is only going to go up. That's catastrophic. You know what I mean? So in the moment that you have something like this that's taking place and it's kicking off, well, the question becomes, well, does it take spark in regards to something that's maybe tangential to what it might have started off as? I mean, the fuel tax in France started off as fuel tax and eventually became something else, to a larger, broader argument about the government itself. I guess my point is something like that would have to happen for this in order to keep the momentum going, because that would allow a large influx of people in. Look, I don't care why the people are out there. I just care that they're out there for some level of injustice, however they define it.
Let me just add in another revelation here. Steve King, House Republican loses his seat there in Iowa, it's revealed to us that there are maybe limits to just how far Americans will go to support white supremacists. As people remember, King last year questioned why white supremacy was considered offensive, Jamal. He has now gone on to lose. Let me just note that revelation there. Maybe there are limits on some people, some places. We did have a caller on the line we wanted to get to. You can also give us a call, 202-521-1320. We have Alex on the line joining us now, wanting to talk about elections and whatever else is on your mind. Alex, how you doing today?
Doing all right. I'm just, I don't know, glued to the news lately. But I was just curious, do you even see, I'm really wondering whether elections are going to go forward. I mean, you just see, I feel like just whatever, semblance of respect or faith that people have in the bourgeois electoral system just gradually eroding as Republicans call for military intervention, which I feel like might not speak to some of their base, and Democrats just continue to be utterly tone deaf on what the real crisis is and the demands of these people, and just telling people, flatly, just go vote. As Democratic mayors and continue to be just as callous and just as defensive about the police brutality as you would expect from only Republicans. I mean, I wouldn't expect that, but I feel like people aren't really seeing a response that's going to motivate people to go to the polls to continue to keep these people in power.
Yeah, thanks, Alex, for the call. Great points. I'll just make a quick comment here, Jamal, and get your longer thoughts. I would say, yes, I think people are going to continue to vote. I think they're going to continue to look towards the electoral process. Obviously, 100 million plus people didn't vote in the last election, so you can easily throw that back at me when it comes to will people continue to vote. I do think that is where a lot of people still turn to and will still engage with. My larger problem, looking at those lines last night, Jamal, is the mechanism to do early voting and absentee voting and mail-in voting, if that's going to be the main mode in November. Last night, again, I can't stress enough, please, people, wash your hands, wear a mask, just do the little things at least to try to slow down the pandemic we're still dealing with. But there's going to be another spike. There has to be, Jamal. I just can't imagine, again, somehow the coronavirus is just going to go away as these stay-at-home orders get lifted, more people are engaging with each other. That who knows what November will look like. But what happened last night that led to these incredibly long lines is, one, people were trying to find follow safety protocols, and basically it was slow because of the coronavirus. Two, they had closed a bunch of the precincts, so everybody was rushed into basically a handful of different polling places as opposed to having all of their local options. So you're basically having to funnel people into lesser spots. And then three, talking to experts on mail-in voting, it takes several rounds to do until you actually get it right, because people aren't registered at their address. They moved addresses lately. They're not getting their ballots. The postal office is under attack, and the routes are slower at times. Mail gets lost in general. All of these different things add up into a very chaotic, and if the election's close whatsoever, I'm pretty confident Donald Trump's not going to just say, you know what, there's a lot uncounted. I'll leave the White House. Don't worry about it. There's going to be a huge contested Supreme Court legal battle a la 2000 that we're just heading for. I don't know how you get around it.
Yeah, we're very cavalier about our voting system, aren't we? I mean, like the way they would shut down a polling location almost on a whim. And both parties does this, by the way. I mean, at one point, Republicans used to always scream Democrats would scream at how the Republicans were gaming the system. But then when the Sanders thing took place in 2016, Democrats were perfectly willing to use the exact same devices in order to disfranchise people it didn't necessarily want in the polling. So, this is, again, on both. I think I do agree with you. People are still going to vote. They consider the government their focal point in regards to the way they organize and pursue their world. So I do think that. I do think they also lose credibility, though. Meaning year after year after year, you get less and less people voting. And you get less and less people voting because those people don't think it engages them. You have a lot of people who are poor, who are people of color, massively disproportionately so, who basically check out of the system. The people who are in the system at some point believes, or in some way have an idea that they are getting something back from their interaction in some kind of political sense. These people were Democrats or Republicans, but a lot of people realize from their real material needs, it's not coming back to them. So I do think they're going to have the election, though, Bob. But with that, you're listening to Political Misfits, Radio Sputnik, live in D.C. We will be back for our last 10 minutes after this.
important hour of the day. It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and digs straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here, sort of kind of with Jamarl Thomas. 10 more minutes with you here, Misfits. We'll fit in a few more stories before we get out of here for the day. CNN, others reporting here, Rod Rosenstein, the former Deputy Attorney General, conceded today that by August of 2017, there was no evidence that the Trump campaign had colluded with Russians to sabotage the 2016 election, even though the investigation into that allegation would persist for another year and a half. Jamarl Thomas, I haven't got the chance to read the story, just seeing it here flash across my screen. What?
Yeah. That's awesome, right?
I can't even process this. The former number 2 at the Justice Department, who had supervised the Mueller investigation, said that there was reasonable suspicion to investigate, even if no conspiracy was found. But he went on to say basically we had no evidence.
That's amazing. I mean, because that's not saying we had evidence, but we think he's innocent. We had no evidence. There was nothing there. But they still kept that case going. He could have killed this case the moment he was like, okay, there's nothing here. But they still kept going for another year and a half with the Russiagate nonsense. I mean, and by the way, if Mueller would have found anything, do you honestly believe Rosenstein would have came in and says, hey, yeah, that's not real? Or even if it was alluding to something implicit, that they would have ran with it. I mean, they would have tried to impeach him for anything. I still think this is a soft coup attempt. That could be wrong.
Rosenstein acknowledged the problems, it says here, with the FISA warrants obtained on former Trump advisor Carter Page that were documented by the Justice Department Inspector General. Asked if he would sign the warrant renewal in 2017 again. He said, no, I would not. Yeah, wow. Okay, thank you, Team FBI and everybody else. I mean, what a blunder here. And Jamarl, I just want to hit my head against the wall now, because every time these kind of stories come out, the unmasking stories, the Steele dossier, the FISA courts, every time I say, well, finally, people, all these liberals, all these lefty Democrats who've been railing against this, finally I can just point this out. I'll send them this article and they'll finally understand that now that the ninth thing has come out that shows all of this was just a publicity stunt. It was a tired way for Hillary Clinton to push and distract from what her campaign didn't do. I don't know, like visit Michigan and visit the swing states, Wisconsin, and not focus just on Arizona and these long shots. Finally, Jamarl, they would finally come around to their senses. And what happens every time? They're going to have some type of excuse. Who's Rod Rosenstein? How dare he? He just worked for Jeff Sessions, blah, blah, blah. He's not that person. But Jamarl, I don't even know what to say anymore.
Russian agent. I mean, that's what they kept saying to Nunez, right? They would be like, yeah, Nunez is working for Vladimir Putin. And they would just throw that out there. And liberal media would be like, oh, that's resistance. We're calling somebody a Russian agent and that's resistance. Like, how bizarre is that? I mean, or for example, Nancy Pelosi ripping up the speech. That's resistance. Like, this is how.
And what did people get from all of that too, right? Like, at the end of the day, look at the moment we are at, right? Did focusing on Russia and this alleged kind of Russian attack on democracy and somehow like lifting up this whole idea and this witch hunt that went on, did that help save George Floyd from being killed?
No, it didn't.
Did that help avoid coronavirus coming to in our health system? Did it radically change? It's just nothing. I mean, you could have focused on so many other things. That is just ridiculous to me. We did have a caller on the line that we did want to get to, patiently waiting. It's been Andrew. Andrew, thank you for waiting. What's on your mind?
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk generally about the protests and the violence, but I would like to touch on 2 points before that. So you were talking about why there's protests happening in Europe. And I think one of the reasons is that the solidarity comes from the idea that a lot of draconian practices that get implemented in the States eventually leak into Europe. And people get on some level understand this and have seen this happen. And for them, the fight also happens overseas. Another thing was, Mar, I think you are right when you talk about the fact that it's class rather than race. And class has always been the problem. Before the black man was the problem, European pale-skinned rich people who never had to work a day under the sun blamed the people with red skin because they would work under the sun. There was always this excuse. It was always class hiding under racism. The problem is, once people drink the Kool-Aid, you have to fight on the ground that racism is the cause until you change people's minds. And this brings to the problem that you cannot win this whole idea of protesting, getting beaten in the streets, thinking that violence is not an option. There has never been a fight won without violence. The problem is those who cherry pick MLK are doing pretty much what CNN does when they show the happy speeches of MLK about race, never show his speeches about economic equality. You're cherry picking history in a way that you do not talk about the Black Panthers, you do not talk about Malcolm X. And every movement is like any government. You have teachers, but you also have an army. If you don't want to look at the army, it doesn't mean it never existed. Violence has always been the last resort and often the winning resort for movements like this. Otherwise, what happened in France? A year of protest, nothing changed. You look at Lebanon, who's been protesting for almost a year. 92% of people were polling positive for the government to go. Nothing changed. The army will hit the streets, and it was quashed. This idea that violence is unforeseeable, you shouldn't resort to violence when you're getting beaten in the streets. I mean, I would have this debate with anybody. Come unarmed, I'll come with a shotgun, and let's have a debate. Let's see if you feel comfortable, someone pointing a gun at you, that you can win this argument without violence. It's just absurd to think that against literally a militarized police, you're going to just chant and make them change their mind.
Andrew, yeah, thank you for the call. Yeah, different tactics, much needed. Jamal Thomas,
I agree.
One tactic. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with him. I mean, like there's no right and wrong in this stuff. I mean, there's no cosmic deity that says this action is right or this action is no. That doesn't exist. What are you trying to accomplish, and what are your objectives in a way to get to accomplish that? That's all it ever is. And so if violence is a tool to get you from point A to point B in a situation, then it is. If peaceful resistance is a tool to do it, then it is. I mean, people make their choices in regards to what they want to do. All things being equal, I would hope that people aren't, attacking and injuring and killing innocent people. I think it's going to be counterproductive. But I do think it's, naive to believe that some of these things take place, especially with a government that doesn't necessarily want to go anywhere without some level of force. I don't see it.
All right, Jamal, we have time for one more story. I'll give you the option. Do you want to do blackface, black bloc, or Black Lives Matter?
Oh, wow. All right, let's do black bloc. Let's do black
bloc. Different tactics here. We got some surprising news to end the show here today, Misfits. Hold on to your hats. The FBI's field office in Washington, D.C., quote, has no intelligence indicating Antifa involvement or presence in the violence that occurred on May 31st in the Capitol during demonstrations over the murder of George Floyd. The information comes from a story in The Nation by Ken Klipperstein, who says that he's seen the internal FBI situation report on the event, but that didn't stop President Trump from tweeting later that day that he had designated Antifa a terrorist organization, or Attorney General William Barr following up with the statement that, quote, the violence instigated and carried out by Antifa and the other similar groups in connection with the rioting is domestic terrorism and will be treated accordingly. The FBI report, based on CHS, the confidential human source, canvassing open source social media partner engagement and liaison FBI WFO, has no intelligence indicating Antifa involvement or presence. But of course, we all know this administration doesn't respect the beloved U.S. intelligence community. So why on earth would they rely on their analysis? Antifa's their favorite boogeyman, so Antifa got to be behind any violence, and it seems simply impossible to me that by now they haven't grasped the concept that Antifa isn't a formal organization with a leadership structure, but more of an ethos. So they've obviously constructed this golem deliberately and are desperately trying to peddle it in the nation so they have an excuse to crack down on mostly peaceful protests and any civil disobedience. Jamal Thomas, the blackface there, as you were wondering, what was the blackface story? That was Justin Trudeau giving a very awkward press conference when they asked about Donald Trump gassing protesters. A long, long silence followed. He then gave on a statement, yes, we have racism here in Canada. I obviously had my history with blackface. No, he obviously didn't say that. He wouldn't go that far off script tomorrow, but obviously.
Yeah, that was funny. 23 seconds. 23
of silence,
seconds.
not knowing. I couldn't tell if he was just like thinking, if he was trying to make a point by staying silent, or he was just so flabbergasted and didn't know what to say because he hadn't prepared it. What was it?
I think he was shook. He's scared
Oh,
of Donald
really?
Trump. He thought Trump was going to rough him up or something. I mean, he just didn't. I don't know what it was. I don't know if his brain locked up on him or what.
Yeah, yeah, wild press conference. My brain locked up just trying to process what he was processing, Jamal Thomas. Well, luckily for me, my brain gets a rest. We are at the end of the show. Thank you for all of you out there listening. Thank you to our guests, Nicole Roussel and Mohammed El Mazi. Big thank you to Ryan, Dimitri, Andre, and Saul, and the entire Sputnik News team. Shout out, as always, to our producer, Michelle Whitty. On behalf of Jamal Thomas and myself, I'm Bob Schlehuber. Thank you for listening. Now get back to organizing.
Guys, as always, I appreciate all of you joining us for the show. We have some chats, so let's go through that after show. Let's see. Moderate Rebel. Hashtag #MeTooBlueCrime. I am disabled and Robin Sherwood of the Halifax Regional Police assaulted me. I'm sorry, Moderate Rebel. They've been assaulting a lot of people, apparently. It is, I suppose, good that you were able to get their name because many of the ones here would not even tell you who they are and where they're from. Tom, cops wearing out, working double shift. We have the numbers. They will run out of supplies too. Unemployment equals no taxes equals no revenue. Basically, the budget is going to get ballooned. This was the Standing Rock issue, right? Under Obama, where they were doing Occupy Wall Street and Standing Rock. The cops had to be brought in from all of these different places and everything else, and they were basically doing double duty, trying to either arrest, beat. They were bringing in private contractors with dogs and whatnot. It was utterly disgusting, and it was under Obama. Wesley Walker. What would happen if we started holding the entire department accountable for one officer actions? That's interesting. Now, if you remember, if it's one, but see, that's just it, Wesley. I don't buy that it's one. He had 3 people there watching him murder a guy casually. This is something that these guys do all the time. They didn't think they were doing anything wrong. They thought the way they were basically killing that man was the typical way that they go about doing their job when that person looks like him. So it's like, is that one? I severely doubt it. I mean, the fact that they stood around and watched him, they will vouch for him. I can show you a ton of videos where cops are plowing in the crowds. When they killed Tamir Rice, 13 years old, 2 seconds flat, or Garner, or Floyd. I guess I'm making the point that they engage people in a very particular way. And engaging people in that way, it's not just one. It's a culture that allows them to propagate and get by with that. Because otherwise, those other cops would have turned him in. They would be like, hey, you just murdered that guy. They didn't do that. Or, hey, you're beating that person up. I have never seen that personally. I know my wife has said she found one in her entire lifetime. Usually, they back up the other officer and they would lie in behalf of that officer. These guys are practiced liars and lunatics. Mr. Broken Ass, thank you for covering Assange. Oh, dude, yeah, we've been covering Assange going all the way back from years. I mean, I think from the beginning of this show, I've covered Assange. I mean, I guess my thought is if you're using his content and you recognize how vital it is to know what your government is doing. Like, you're supposedly have a philosophical responsibility to keep track of your government, meaning that's military, its finances, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Your responsibility, philosophically so. But we have a Frankenstein monster in the way that our government operates. And oftentimes, a lot of that stuff happens in the black. Assange, he's the guy. Meaning, that's the person who was able to say, look, this is the documents. This is what they're talking about behind the scenes. This is the real unvarnished truth. We're not adding anything to it. You can see it for yourself. That is unique. And that is something that we should cherish. And the fact that the guy who's basically giving you the truth is now being killed in a prison as a political prisoner in the UK, as opposed to the practiced liar in the White House, or the horrible liar in the White House, not to mention the people out here who was, the practiced liars and the people who are basically robbing the public's blind. They can propagate themselves just fine. No issue at all. Those people stay out of prison. It's utterly astonishing the way our society is organized. Carrie Mack, our ideas are deadly to corporate government. It's that. If you're talking about organizations that will take the blunt boot of the government, you're talking about socialist or worker organizations, because those organizations are talking about resources and having those resources, or our society organized in a way where those resources are distributed far more fairly. Billionaires should not exist.